This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
The first chapter deals with some aspects of organisations, and it begins by trying to define an organisation. And what we have here is a commonly accepted definition. It's a social arrangement which pursues collective goals, which controls its own performance, and which has a boundary separating it from its environment. And all of those aspects are quite important. First of all, the idea that it's a social arrangement here. Organisations do comprise of people, and people are social beings, and we do have to get on with one another, we do interact with one another. And a lot of management theory is devoted to trying to work out how we can best interact with each other. Should it just be giving orders, or should it be some sort of more participative aspect to the organisation? Pursuing collective goals. The idea would be that everyone knows what the goal is and everyone is actively employed on trying to achieve those goals. It's not going to be a very successful organisation if some people are, for example, pursuing profit and other people are, for example, pursuing a good time. There has to be some agreement on what the goals are, or the organisation will not be effective. Controlling its own performance. Okay, a company will have shareholders who will be ultimately interested in its performance, but on a day-to-day basis it is up for the duties of the people within the organisation to measure how they're getting on, to keep an eye on performance, and to, where necessary, change course a little bit. And finally, the idea of a boundary separating the organisation from its environment. You have to know what is part of the organisation, what is outside the organisation. What can you control, or what is it legitimate for you to try to control, and what is beyond your control, and perhaps you have to put up with that. Second thing we look at is the types of organisation, and they can be split over a number of different headings. First of all, their ownership. It can be private, like a private company or a private business, or it could be owned by a government, whether it's a central government or a local government, some sort of public sector or public ownership. Secondly, there is the motive, and broadly the motives are either profit-seeking, like most listed companies, or it could be what's called not-for-profit or non-profit organisations. For example, charities, schools, many hospitals, if they're state-owned, are not-for-profit organisations. And then finally is the legal structure. We'll come on to looking at the legal structure in a moment. First, however, let's get clear. There's a lot of kind of confusion here, and it's somewhere where questions can quite easily come up. Is to what extent is a private sector organisation profit-seeking or non-profit-seeking? And most private sector organisations are profit-seeking. Most of them are businesses, and they're seeking to produce profits for their owners. But they are not exclusively profit-seeking. You can have private sector organisations whose aims might be purely charitable. They could be non-profit-seeking. Similarly, most public sector organisations are not for profit. The local government, the local council, will have some sort of a street cleaning part of that organisation. It's not particularly profit-seeking. The local government will be building roads, and again, unless there's tolls on those roads, it's not going to be profit-seeking. So most public sector organisations are not profit-seeking, but they can be. In the UK, about 30-40 years ago, many large businesses were owned by the government. They were nationalised businesses, like many things in the car industry, the steel industry, the railway tracks and the rolling stock. A lot of shipbuilding companies are all owned by the government, and really the hope was that they would produce profits. Very often they didn't, perhaps because governments are in general not very good at running organisations, certainly not running organisations in a way to produce profits. So don't get mixed up on that. Private sector does not just mean profit seeking. It could be a non-profit seeking organisation. Public sector does not just mean non-profit. It could be a public sector profit seeking organisation. And then we have the legal structures here. And the legal structures are really as follows. First of all, sole traders. And a sole trader is just an individual who starts up a business. Sole because they're on their own. They may have employees, but really they are the sole owner of that business. The difficulty with sole trader organisations, well, there can be difficulty with shared ownership. A father, for example, starts a business, and then when he gets on a bit, he wants to share that ownership with, say, his son and his daughter. It's really quite difficult to share a sole trader type organisation. Or if the founder of the organisation dies, then strictly speaking in law, the organisation ceases. And maybe it has to be, the assets have to be inherited by the children and kind of start it up again. But it's very quick and easy. Certainly in the UK, you can set yourself up as a sole trader within about a day. You just tell the Inland Revenue you're going to be starting to trade. You get some paper published with your letterhead on it and so on, and away you go. There's hardly any bureaucracy to get through at all. Partnerships, a bit like sole traders, but more than one person. A partnership is a number of people trading together with a view to profit. And once an organisation gets larger, it becomes quite difficult for a sole trader to have the time or the energy or indeed the competence, perhaps, to properly manage a larger business. And many firms of solicitors, many accounting firms are partnerships because there's a kind of shared responsibility and great help from one partner to others in terms of workload and advice and the like. Limited companies are one of the most common forms of private sector organisation. Sometimes they're called incorporated entities. Now the thing about both sole traders and partnerships is that strictly speaking the business had no separate life from its owner. The owner of the business directly owns the assets of the business. Similarly, the partners of a partnership directly own the assets of a partnership. If the sole trader were to run into trouble and began owing money to lots of suppliers that the business couldn't pay, then those suppliers could come after the sole trader for his or her personal assets. They could claim the house of that person and sell it. Similarly with a partnership, there is no what's called limited liability. The liability of the business is the liability of its owners. Companies, however, these incorporated entities, are what's called persona at law. They have a separate legal existence. There is the owners, the shareholders, and there is the company, and they are quite separate. The shareholders own the company, but the company owns the assets. If the company gets into trouble and begins owing lots of its suppliers money, the suppliers can come after the company, but that's where the liability stops. They cannot then pursue the owners of that company for their personal wealth. And that's where limited liability comes in. That's what it means. It doesn't mean that the liability of the company is limited. The liability of the company is unlimited for all its debts. It means that the liability of the owner is limited. The ownership and the power within limited companies is determined by the number of shares. Typically, when a limited company is set up, it might have 100 shares. And those can be spread out any way you like. Could be 100% in one person, could be 50-50 between two partners. You could share 10% over each person. You could give one person 5 shares, another person 20 shares, another person 30 shares, and so on. And it's a mark of your stake in the company, and indeed your voting power when it comes to manage the company is given by your shares. You own the shares, you get money from the company because if the company makes profits, it can pay some of those profits out as what's called a dividend. And the dividend is per share. So reflected in the share ownership is not only its power, but also the voting rights and the profit share as well. Very, very common. People love the limited liability which comes with these. It takes a lot of risk out of starting up a business. You could be a business which is maybe in the building industry, and what happens if maybe 5 years later a flaw is discovered in the building? That means that in a way, provided you haven't been fraudulent or negligent, you as the owner of the building company are safe. You sleep better at night. Indeed, limited liability and incorporated entities were invented to encourage people to start up businesses, to take some of the risk out of it. The downside, the disadvantage of limited liability companies is that there's a bit more bureaucracy. You have to go through certain legal steps to set them up. But again, it doesn't take much more than a day in the UK to do that. But their affairs are public. The ownership is public. In the UK, there's something called Companies House or Companies Registrar, where all of this information is made public. The profit of these companies and their financial statements is public as well, because you need to know what you're dealing with. If you're dealing with something with a limited liability, you want to know if it's something of substance. Does it have a good trading history? Or is it something which is trying to get me to supply goods and it has no hope of ever paying for those goods? So the kind of balancing act is, yes, you can have limited liability, but you have to make public your affairs so people can make a fair judgment. Cooperatives are often companies, but basically they're kind of mutual organizations. A number of people get together to own an organization together. They're often not profit-seeking. They are maybe pursuing the purchase of food cooperatively, maybe the purchase of pharmaceuticals cooperatively, because you get a much better deal if you can buy in bulk. And then these are shared out amongst people to their mutual benefit. If there are any profits, again, these would be shared out amongst people for their mutual benefit. The way many organizations actually begin is they will start as sole traders, just to see how it goes, no fuss, no bother, just start as that. And then what happens? Well, they might become a partnership, they might get somebody else on board, but really get very, very big, they will become limited liability companies. And it is these limited companies which are found on stock exchanges. These are the biggest companies in the world, will be incorporated entities with limited liability. It should be said now that many partnerships also enjoy limited liability. There are something called limited liability partnerships, and many large firms of accountants and lawyers make use of, again, this safety net which is there. In case something goes wrong with the business, then the partners have got some safeguards for their personal assets, for themselves and their families. The next term we must kind of define is that of stakeholders. And a stakeholder can be defined as anything or any person which is in some way affected or touched by an organization. So down the left here we have a typical list of stakeholders. These are the people who are going to be affected by organizations. You can have shareholders in a limited company, employees, customers, suppliers, the local people, and government. If the organisation doesn't do so well, all of these people are going to be affected. Really, they're going to be badly affected. If the organisation is very successful, then most of these people are going to be pretty happy. However, they do want different things. They have a stake in the company, perhaps not a direct legal stake, but they have a stake in the company and what it does, and they want different things, and very often these are in conflict. For example, shareholders will normally want their profits to increase so that the dividends can increase and so the share value rises and they become richer. However, to get profits up, you want to keep maybe wages down. And of course, employees want wages to be up. They want good holidays, they want good terms and conditions, they want good pensions. And in a way, you could argue that as the profits go up, so then some of these are going to go down. Similarly, the customers, they want good prices. They want low prices here. They want the prices to be low. But of course, if the prices are low, then the profits are going to be low. If you make stuff at really, really high quality and you don't put the price up, then again, it's going to be a potential eating into your profit margin. So again, there's a kind of a bit of standoff between the shareholders and the employees and the shareholders and the customers. And it's not always just the shareholders who are involved. You can get a standoff as well between the employees and the customers. So employees want to work maybe 5 days a week, and they want to work roughly 9 to 5. 40-hour week, 5 days a week, no working weekend. Many organizations, or the customers or the clients of many organizations, however, would like 7 days operations. And they'd like to be able to maybe phone up their supplier maybe from 7 in the morning till 10 at night. And once you have people working 7 in the morning till 10 at night, then you have shift systems and you're going to have people in on weekends and so on. So again, there can be a discrepancy or a bit of a conflict between what employees and customers want. Similarly, suppliers want nice big orders. They don't want you to complain. However, as a shareholder, you might want to say, well, I would rather give you small orders so that if my sales fall off, then I'm not left with all of this unsold inventory and so on. The local people, they want an easy time. Perhaps they want good employment, but if you took the organisation, say, being an airport, the shareholders and maybe the managers would like the airport to be working 24 hours a day to make the best use of the runways and the infrastructure at the airport. But you can be pretty sure the local people might quite like there to be no aeroplanes between 6 in the morning and maybe 12 at night. That they have a period of quietness, if you like, for sleep. And then government. Government has very sorts of kind of mixed motives in here. It wants employees to be safely employed, but the government also wants taxes. It wants employees to be well paid, but again the government wants the company to make profits so that the company can be taxed and so on here. Again, potential conflict between what the government wants and maybe what the shareholders want. We see it at the moment, conflict between companies like maybe Google and maybe Apple. They want very strong encryption to be possible so that no one can interfere with messages. They say this is important for our customers. But many governments around the world say, well, if you've got very, very strong encryption, it means our security services, our police can't intercept messages which are maybe vital to saving lives and to preserving the law and so on. So again, there's a kind of a conflict. Now, there will always be conflicts. It's not the fault of management that there is a fault, that there's a conflict between these stakeholders. What stakeholders will be wanting is different things, and it's up for management to manage it. Management must find a compromise. They must pay employees enough that they don't go and strike or don't leave, yet not too much that they cause the company to make losses, for example, and there's negotiation and compromise going on here. Sometimes, of course, the negotiations don't go well. Sometimes the wage negotiations fall to bits, and the employees go and strike, and there's a kind of a standoff. Or if the company did something which its customers didn't like, then the customers might well be able to switch to another supplier. And again, there's been a kind of failure in the negotiations there. So it's up to management to manage these conflicts so as to keep most of the people happy for most of the time. But you won't keep everyone happy all of the time. Now, the model which is around to at least explain or perhaps help people to manage these stakeholder conflicts is called Mendelow's matrix. And Mendelow's matrix looks at two aspects of the stakeholder. First of all, there is their power. And second, there is their interest. And how it really means how active is a stakeholder likely to be? How likely are they to actually take action if the organisation does something they don't like? Are they actually likely to leave their job? Are they likely to go and strike? Are they likely to change supplier to something else? And these two measures are mapped out like this. So we have the level of stakeholder interest and we have the stakeholder power. And we'll give some kind of examples here which may or may not be be current examples, but they will help you understand what's happening. First of all, down here, key players. They have the power and they are very active, potentially very militant. They will take action. They will vote with their feet. And a good example of this, not quite so present maybe nowadays, but certainly until recently in some airlines, airline cabin staff. In some airlines, the airline cabin staff were very, very militant. They had a history of kind of going on strike for really quite what many travellers would say very small reasons. And of course, they've got great power because it's illegal to fly the aeroplane without the required number of cabin staff there. And in many airlines, we're talking now not the new low-cost ones, but the full-service traditional airlines, cabin staff got themselves into a really, really desirable position through really series of strikes each year. They ended up being paid huge amounts of money because the key players come at the front of the queue when it comes to getting what you want. You have the power. Management knows you have the power. Management knows you will act on that power. So management kind of caves in and gives you what you want. Perhaps second on the queue here is to keep satisfied. These people have power, but for some reason are reluctant to act on that power. They have a relatively passive sort of attitude here, perhaps through habit, perhaps through ethical or professional reasons. For example, until recently, doctors and nurses in the health service in the UK never went on strike. At the moment, at the time of this recording, the health service is in some turmoil, and for the first time in about 40 or 50 years, junior doctors did go on strike. The idea is that these people can be pushed quite a long way because their professional, ethical, moral outlook will kind of keep them on board, will stop them from taking action. But if you push them too far, as they would say the current Secretary of State is pushing them, they will take action. You can provoke them, if you like, from there to there. But for a lot of the time, you give these people enough just to kind of keep them separate, just to keep them kind of satisfied. And therefore, they don't get perhaps as much pay or as much conditions and so on, good conditions, as the key players might. Keep informed up here. What about these keep informed people? These are people who are very active, very concerned, but they've got very little power. They are almost empty vessels in some way. A lot of noise comes from these people, but they can't do very much about it. Maybe the sort of example we've had in the past are people who protest against new airport expansions. So obviously if you're going to be in a new flight path, or if your house is going to be demolished for a new runway, you're very, very interested in this, you're going to be very militant about it. But in fact, legally speaking, there's relatively little you can do once the planning has gone through all its legal protests, legal steps and so on here. You can protest, you can stand outside with placards, but it gets kind of illegal really to invade airports and to stop them functioning. You keep them informed. First, as an act of politeness, but secondly, if you keep them informed, maybe what they fear is not as bad as what's actually going to happen. And then finally, we have these minimal interest people. No power, not very passive, not very active, very passive, laid back sort of people. Minimal interest is almost a polite way of saying you can ignore these people. Not very nice to say you're going to ignore certain stakeholders, but essentially that's what you're doing. They are right at the end of the queue when it comes to getting anything. Examples could be low-skilled people, because low-skilled people tends to mean there's no difficulty in replacing them. Low-skilled people who are perhaps not after a permanent job. So they're not going to get worked up about what's happening at one particular employer. They'll just say, well, I don't like you, I'll just go somewhere else, and so on. But they're never going to get perhaps very much from what's happening. Note that in these stakeholders, sometimes government and laws, which just go up here, is giving more power to some people. It used to be that nearly all power resided with shareholders, but increasingly laws are giving more powers to employees. Health and safety laws, minimum wages, maximum working weeks, unfair dismissal sorts of laws. It's taking power away from shareholders, giving it to employees. Similarly, in the customers, there's more and more consumer law, that if the article breaks down within a month, you can take it back. Or you have a cooling off period for 2 weeks with some sorts of contracts and so on. We could even argue that some power has been given to local people in terms of environmental legislation. No, you can't pollute the local river. You can't let noxious gases free into the atmosphere and so on. So the power really has shifted perhaps a little bit through statute. There are various classes of stakeholder for what it's worth. Internal tend to be within the organisation, obviously, tends to be employees, managers and directors. Connected are people with a contract. So typically connected would be suppliers, would be customers, and usually in fact shareholders are put into the connected rather than internal. And then finally there are external. There's no real contractual involvement at all. Certainly your local people are there, and usually the government is put in as an external stakeholder. I always find this internal, connected, external a little bit academic. It doesn't make much difference, in fact. What really matters is this Mendelow's matrix. Where is the power and who is likely to exercise it is more important than whether I think they're going to be classified as internal, connected or external. Mission and vision. A mission, an organization's mission, is really your reason for existence. What is your core purpose? And it has become certainly fashionable for organizations to state what their mission is, maybe in their annual report or certainly in their website. There's perhaps an element of fashion about it, but thinking of the good things for mission, it makes people think, well, why are we here? What is our real purpose? What are we trying to accomplish? So let's have a look at some of these, and these are in the printed notes as well here. Some are perhaps better than others here. So here we have Harley Davidson. We fulfill dreams through the experience of motorcycling. So they're very, very firmly saying we are a motorcycling based company by providing motorcyclists and to the general public an expanding line of motorcycles and products and services in selected market segments. This helps investors, it helps employees, it helps customers to say, well, this is an organization which is dedicated to the pastime or the method of transport of motorcycling. And it keeps Harley Davidson kind of on the straight and narrow. Harley Davidson is making motorcycles, it's making branded products, there's an element of fashion in there and so on. But Harley Davidson isn't going to go off suddenly and go into supermarkets. And although you may think that's a bit silly, there have been unfortunate histories of organisations trying to diversify rather unsuitably to go into areas of business quite unlike what they know about, thinking they can do that as well. And of course, by and large, they make a complete mess of it. So this keeps everyone focused. This is the idea of the mission statement. Microsoft. To empower every person and every organisation on the planet to achieve more. Well, I would say that's almost sloganish rather than mission. I've no idea what that means. There's no thought in there. It's anything to do with making computers or making software. It will be improved, as I said, through the provision of reliable and cheap computers and of efficient software or whatever they thought was appropriate. But to empower every person, every organisation on the planet to achieve more, it could be almost a slogan of Nike, you can run faster, or perhaps a slogan of a telephone company, because you can communicate better, or a slogan perhaps of a pharmaceutical company, because it keeps you well. So I'm not sure it's a very good one. And then we have GSK, which is GlaxoSmithKline, a large pharmaceutical company. Our mission is to help people do more, feel better, live longer. And that's not bad. If you're in the health industry, the pharmaceutical business, help people to do more, feel better, live longer is not bad. Keeps it quite open. It might be improved a little bit if it had on something here like through research and testing of drugs and bringing it to market at reasonable prices. But they didn't put that one on. A well-constructed mission statement has got these typical elements. First of all, what we really saw in those three headings of Harley Davidson and Microsoft and GSK, a brief description of what it does and why it exists. So we are basically a motorcycle company, or we are a car manufacturer, we are a drug company. Which segment of the market it aims at. For example, the mission statement of Nissan, you'd expect to be subtly different maybe from the Nissan statement of, let's say, Mercedes. So Mercedes would see itself as a kind of rather upmarket provider of prestige cars, executive type cars, where Nissan would see itself more as a provider of good family cars and so on. And quite often the mission statement will give some kind of suggestion here of the area of the market or the area of quality that you're actually aiming at. And then finally, many mission statements follow up with a great long bit here of your values, ethics and culture. And the trouble is that they all end up nearly staying the same. Nearly every mission statement nowadays will say we want to be kind to the environment, we want to reduce our carbon footprint, we want to reduce waste. They will all tend to say that we aim to comply with the laws and regulations in the countries in which we operate. They will all tend to say that we want to give every employee the maximum opportunity to fulfill their potential and the like. Which is all good stuff, but we have to maybe get a little bit cynical. Do they really mean it, or is all of this stuff being added on here because everyone else is doing it and you don't want to be seen as the odd one out? However, you can see a good point to it. If they really keep pushing the values, the ethics and the culture of the organisation, values like good customer service, values like honesty, treating your customers honestly and so on, values like trying to reduce waste, if they really push that, then hopefully some of that will be absorbed by employees. And if it's absorbed by employees, you don't have to watch them as much, you don't have to supervise them as much, you can be more confident that your employees will do the right things. Vision, not quite as important as mission. A vision is a rather almost grand saying of where we want to be in the future. Very similar content to the mission statement, but our vision is to liberate people from disease. So yeah, but that might not be for 50 years, 100 years, and so on. There, for most organisations, the mission is much more important than the vision, because the vision can be rather fairy tale wish for type of stuff. Creating values for shareholders, for stakeholders. Creating value for stakeholders. And this has the three elements within it which organisations need to be in place if they're going to create value for their stakeholders. And perhaps creating value for shareholders in particular. If I'd been giving this lecture 40 years ago, then I would only have been talking about creating value for shareholders. But increasingly there has been a recognition that other stakeholders like employees, like the local community, have perhaps a legitimate expectation from what companies and organisations do. First of all, you have to have in place some mechanism to control and coordinate resources. And it doesn't matter whether you're a profit-seeking organisation or not profit-seeking. In both organisations, you must know, for example, where money needs to be spent. You need to know, should I buy a new machine? And that new machine could be a new manufacturing machine, or it could be a new X-ray machine in a hospital, or it could be new audiovisual machinery in a school. But we have to control that expenditure. And there's no point in, say, putting a new X-ray machine into a hospital if you don't at the same time make sure there is enough staff available to operate the X-ray machine and so on. So coordination is going to make good use of these resources. So how much are we going to spend, where are we going to spend it, when are we going to spend it, how we're going to use it is essential to creating good value for stakeholders. Whether that value is profit or whether that value is simply being treated properly for a disease, or whether that value is what you might expect in a school, whether value is treating the kids to be able to read and write and become literate. You must efficiently produce goods and services. So in a profit-seeking organisation, we tend to be talking about producing goods. We have to make sure there's, for example, no waste. You have to know how many units to produce. You don't have to be throwing them away and so on. You want to coordinate the use of staff so that not too many come in when they're going to be idle. You want to recruit and perhaps have to reduce staff from time to time. But also it's true in services. You, in a hospital, for example, should know when the busy periods are. So typically in the UK, accident emergency operations, accident emergency departments are quite busy on Friday and Saturday nights when people are out enjoying themselves a little bit too much. Also they know, for example, in wintry weather when there's ice and snow around, they're going to get more elderly people with fractures because they slip and they fall. And if you organize your people properly, then you can efficiently deliver the services, match the services to the demand. You won't always do it correctly, but at least it's something you should try to do. And then you must facilitate innovation. It's all very well being good at producing at the minute, or being good at diagnosing diseases at the moment, but nothing stands still. We are in a state really by and large of perpetual progress. New processes are invented. And if we rest on our laurels, as it were, if we said, right, we're good now, we don't have to keep trying, we're going to be left behind. A new, more efficient process for the production of a product will come out. A new material will be invented. A new method of communication will be invented. Suddenly, Skype was invented, and it opened up a whole new way of telecommunication. Similarly, in hospitals, new drugs become available, new procedures become available. In schools, new methods of teaching may become available. Far greater use, perhaps, of the internet, far greater use of technology like iPads and computer-based training and so on can be useful. In a competitive environment, continual improvement is essential. In fact, even if it's not competitive, continual improvement is essential. Why should anyone have to put up with kind of second best, with old technology which doesn't do the job as well, or which does it more expensively? So we have to make sure that we control and coordinate, we efficiently produce goods or deliver services, and that we always spend money and effort keeping up to date, innovating, looking for better ways in which our goals, our missions, our objectives can be achieved.